And joining me now is Ethan Lane. He's the Executive Director of the Public Lands Council and Executive Director of Federal Lands for NCBA. Ethan, let's begin by talking about public lands. Why are public lands so valuable to American cattlemen and cattlewomen?
Well, first of all, 40% of the Western cattle herd spends time at one point or another in their life cycle on federal lands in the West. So whereas an operator in the Midwest or the East can have a successful operation on 1,000 acres or a couple hundred acres, when you get further west into dry, arid climate with a smaller rainfall total each year, you really need that larger footprint to make an operation successful, and that means federal permits. So we spend a lot of time making sure that those producers in the West have access to those permits across the West.
And I know you've talked before on our show about how critically important it is for folks to come back here to DC. Why is that so valuable?
Well, they hear from us all of the time. Our staff here in DC spends every day on Capitol Hill, and we do a fantastic job making sure that our congressional leaders and their staff really understand the fine detail of these issues. But hearing it from producers in person, hearing those personal stories is absolutely irreplaceable. There's a world of difference between us telling them and the producers telling them themselves, and you can see the legislators' eyes light up, and you can see that recognition as they hear those personal stories.
One issue I know public lands ranchers deal with is endangered species and some of the legislation and regulation around that. Can you give us an update?
Absolutely. Endangered Species Act implementation is something that has plagued cattle producers across the West for generations now. We're talking about a 40-year-long history of a law that has just gone well beyond what was intended, in large part because a lot of the activist environmental groups that are so opposed to the cattle industry and other resource industries in the West have really mastered the art of suing the federal government for implementation along terms that are more favorable to them. So we've spent a lot of time and energy here in Washington, D.C. helping Congress and the presidency and the administration understand just why we need to get this act working the way the American people already think that it does. So a lot of that focuses on making sure that when we do a listing decision, that we have enough data to know what recovered looks like for that species. So we're not just leaving it open-ended for generations to deal with, like the gray wolf, say in the Midwest and the upper Great Lakes, where we have more than 4,000 wolves now running around in an area that just simply can't support that many. So we're trying to focus on common sense ways to make that law work better for producers and for the species that are being protected.
During the previous administration, we talked a little bit about what was going on in terms of the Antiquities Act. Have we seen any positive change there?
Quite a bit. We're actually in an administration now that really understands the problems with the Antiquities Act as it's written. This is an incredibly vague law that was written in 1906 with the best of intentions. Teddy Roosevelt wanted to make sure that as we were exploring the West, as we were exploring all these new lands, if we stumbled upon some antiquities, some Native American burial grounds, pots, anything like that, that the president could step in quickly and draw a circle on the map and make sure that those things weren't disturbed. What we've seen, unfortunately, in the 110, 111 years since then is presidents abuse that power for their own purposes. Fast forward to 2017 and the end of the Obama administration, we saw multi-million acre landscapes being locked up by a law that, when originally debated in Congress, was focused on 600 acres or 1,200 acres maximum. So we've gone well beyond the intent. We finally have some bills moving on both the House side and the Senate side that would really bring some controls in place, that would put a requirement for local input and sign off on any designations over about 5,000 acres. And as that total got higher, the need for input and sign off would grow along with that, which really is a common sense way to build some controls in and bring local impacted stakeholders back to the table. We also have a president now that has asked for that input. And he said, look, let us know how to fix this law so that future presidents can't abuse it. And that's a real new direction. We've never seen a president be willing to limit his own power like this before. So we're excited at the possibilities.
That really is positive. And one last question. These are all important issues. What would you say to producers in terms of how they should get involved?
Make your voices heard. One thing I spend a lot of time talking about is how good the other side of these issues are at getting their voices out. And I'm talking about in your local paper. All of us sit around the coffee shop back home and we read the local paper and we see an op-ed that is just really one-sided and hits the industry right in the chest. And what we need to do a really much better job of is getting that voice out both in DC and out in the country. So the best way producers can do that is let their senators and congressmen know the reality of these situations in their backyard, but pick up a pen, write to your local paper, make sure your voice is heard on all levels because it's important to get those voices out there.
Fantastic recommendations. Thanks so much for coming to the show.
Thanks for having me.